Hi, everybody. So today we are going to be showing you some pictures. That's what we wanted to start out by doing to kind of help you figure out or guess what we're going to be talking about today. And so we're just going to go through a few of these pictures. So if you look on the screen here, these are all super important things that we're going to be talking about today. And so if you didn't guess it by this point, we're going to be talking about something called monuments.
Yeah, so just like you said, we're talking about monuments, and all these pictures that we show are different monuments. Are there other monuments that you can think of that we didn't show? There's lots that are all around the world, especially here in the United States. Lots of different monuments.
And so we wanted to kind of talk to you about the monuments that we thought of to explain why they're so important. And so the first one that we have here, you probably know what it is. It's the Statue of Liberty, and it's actually located in New York City on Ellis Island. And this is kind of a beacon of freedom. When people back in the day came to the United States, it was a chance for them to start over in a new place. And a lot of immigrants came in, and when they saw this Statue of Liberty, they saw it as what the U.S. represents, that of freedom, of a new life.
Yeah. So the next one, this one's called the Washington Monument. This is located in Washington, D.C., and this monument was created in honor of George Washington. He was one of the United States' greatest founding fathers, and he did a lot for our country. And so this monument was created in remembrance of him because he's an awesome guy, did a lot of great things.
Exactly. Our next one here is actually of George Washington. It's a statue of him. And just like she said, it's another monument of him in a different place in Washington, D.C. that represents everything that he did for us.
And the next one, this one's called the U.S. Marine Corps War Memorial. This is located in Arlington, Virginia. And this memorial was originally created to remember those who have died and who have fought for our country, and also stands for those people who are continue to fight for our country today. So pretty important memorial.
Oh, for sure. And then this one right here is actually a statue of Abraham Lincoln at the Idaho State Capitol. George Washington. I'm so sorry. Abraham Lincoln did a lot to help Idaho in its founding of its government. And so we see him as a great symbol for that. And that's why we have a statue of him in the front.
Yeah, and so this last one that we have, it's called the Craters of the Moon Monument. It's located in central Idaho, and a lot of times we have monuments or things to remember people and statues to remember people. But for this specific monument, we have this to preserve a certain part of land, to preserve this environment. Here at Craters of the Moon, this is where lava flows and craters are found. And so the people, it's preserved for the people to enjoy. So that's why this monument is created, to preserve and protect this certain part of land. So yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Okay. And so some questions that we kind of want you to think about as we move forward are, why are monuments important? And why do we make monuments for specific people?
Yeah. So just like I mentioned before, monuments are created for all different kinds of things, to remember people, to remember events, and to preserve certain parts of land. And so for this next part of the video, we wanted to introduce you to a new monument, a monument that you may have heard before. It's a monument specifically dedicated to some important people. And so we're going to introduce you to some of these people here soon.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So today, let's see if you guys can guess to see who I am. I'm 6 feet and 2 inches tall, and I love books. I cannot live without them. I have between 9,000 and 10,000 books. My first library was largely destroyed by a fire in my family's home. Also, many people consider me to be the inventor of macaroni and cheese. While I visited France and northern Italy in the late 1700s, I fell in love with the macaroni noodle. So much so that I had a ton of it shipped back to my home in Virginia. I became known for serving my own concoction of macaroni and cheese at fancy get-togethers, including presidential dinners. So, do you guys know who I am? That's right, I'm Thomas Jefferson. I am the 3rd president of the United States, and I'm also known as a founding father. I served as U.S. Minister to France, the U.S. Secretary of State, and Vice President under John Adams. I also wrote the famous words, "Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." I am also on the $2 bill. And on the back of it is me writing the Declaration of Independence. I am mighty in write, but not in speech, so I often would write my speeches, but I have someone else give them for me. I drafted the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which granted freedom and religion to people with all religious faiths. It was a precursor to the clause in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. One of my greatest accomplishments while I was president was when I sent Lewis and Clark to explore the lands west of the Mississippi River. By doing so, we were able to buy that land, and the United States doubled in size. It's also known as the Louisiana Purchase. During my presidency, I abolished the slave trade, as well as established the United States Military Academy, which became one of the leading institutions in America. After I was president, I started the University of Virginia. I'm also not a huge fan of Alexander Hamilton, and I died a few hours after John Adams on the 4th of July.
Hi students, today you're going to be guessing who I am based off some facts and stories. So I was the 26th President of the United States, and that was during the Progressive Era. I also was one of the people who expanded the national parks and forest services the most. And I created the Panama Canal. One of my really interesting stories is I went on a hunting trip in Idaho, and I brought a camera, and I wanted to take a photo of this particularly beautiful waterfall. So the two people I had with me, I had them tie a rope around my waist and dangle me over the waterfall and tie the other end to a tree. And I took the photo and I said, "Pull me back up." And they kept trying and they couldn't pull me back up. And they didn't want to cut the rope because I would fall and get hurt because it was too far to go down. So I had an idea. I told them to get an even longer rope, tie it around my waist and tie it to the tree, and then cut the short rope, and then I would get lower to the ground and then cut that rope. And they did it, and it got me closer to the water, and except for a few bruises, I turned out all right. Another time, I went hunting with some of my friends, and we parked our boat, went hunting for the day, and came back, and our boat had been stolen. And so we spent 3 days sitting on the bank of the river building our own new boat in the freezing cold. And after 3 days, we built our boat and we set off down the river after the boat leaves. And we went on again for 3 days. We sat on the water going, and it was through 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And after those 3 days, we found the men who stole the boat, which they weren't expecting us, and we were hoping that we didn't get into a shootout. And we apprehended them and took them to the authorities. And one of my most famous stories is that I was shot during the middle of a campaign speech, and I had something in my pocket that blocked it. And I said, "What we're fighting for is more important. You can't even take down a bull moose with a shot." And that's why I got the nickname Bull Moose. So I am Teddy Roosevelt, or Theodore Roosevelt.
Hello students, today you're going to try and figure out who I am through a list of stories and facts. So first I'm going to start off by explaining this picture of a famous battle I was in. This is the Delaware River, and on Christmas 1776 it was very cold and wintry. On one side of the river stood me and the Continental Army. On the other side of the river, a British army held the town of Trenton of New Jersey. The cold river separated us. The British Army didn't anticipate when I led the troops across the river to defeat the British Army. They surrendered. And a few years later, at the Siege of Yorktown, the British Army completely surrendered and America won the Revolutionary War. After this battle, some men persuaded me to go to an event called the Constitutional Convention. Here, I was elected the president of the convention. For 4 months, me and other great men drafted and created the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. During this 4-month-long convention, we withstood the hot and humid state of Pennsylvania. Shortly after this convention, I became the first president of the United States. I served for 2 terms, and after that, I retired and returned home to my house called Mount Vernon in Virginia. Here, I grew wheat, owned slaves, lived in my mansion, and this is also the place of me and my wife's burial grounds. I died on December 14th, 1779, from a sickness. So, do you know who I am? That's right. I'm George Washington, the first president of the United States. I'm regarded as a founding father because I commanded the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. I helped to draft and create the Constitution, which is the basis of our current government, and I always strive to be a virtuous, patient, and responsible man for this country. It was great talking to you, and I hope you learned more about me.
Hello, let's see if you can guess who I am. One thing I'm known for are my stories. Now, back before I was elected to office, I was a lawyer, mostly self-taught too. During this time, I was discussing a trade of horses with a judge in Illinois. The judge and I decided that we would do a blind trade, meaning we would both bring our horses and trade them without having seen them before. The day of the trade, the judge brought his horse, and it was the sorriest looking thing I'd ever seen. I bet he'd think he won the exchange, but he didn't know that I had the upper hand and that I would have the last laugh, for I brought not a horse, but a wooden sawhorse that you would use for carpenting, and I still think I had the worst end of the deal. Storytelling and jokes aside, here are some other facts that might help you know who I am. I was alive during the Civil War and famously assassinated at the theater. I'm 6'4" tall. During my lifetime, I was a writer. In fact, you might remember this line, 77 years ago. I won't go on, but do you have any guesses on who I am? That's right, I'm President Abraham Lincoln, also known as Honest Abe. I was given this nickname because I prided honesty and integrity, and I tried to live by those during my presidency. As I mentioned earlier, I was alive during the Civil War. In fact, I was the president during it. I oversaw the nation during this time of hardship and grief, and it was my goal to win the war and keep the country together. The line from my speech that I quoted earlier is from my famous Gettysburg Address, which I gave during the Civil War. I also told you that I was 6'4". To this day, I am still the tallest president. I'm the face of the American penny. I was the 16th president of this great nation, and at the end of my presidency, I gave the Emancipation Proclamation, which, while it didn't free all of the slaves in America, it was the first step in ending slavery. The 13th Amendment, which officially ended the enslavement of African Americans in America, came out just 8 months after my death. I was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth on a trip to the theater during 1865, only 1 week after the Civil War ended. So, we've been talking about monuments and monumental people. One great example of this is Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore is a 60-foot high carving of 4 presidents' faces in the Black Hills of South Dakota. The original idea for this monument was to promote Western pride, with the Sioux chief Red Cloud being the first candidate to go on. However, the monument was changed, and instead it became a shrine to democracy to promote national pride. Now it shows the 4 presidents of Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln. Each of these presidents was chosen for a very specific reason. With Washington, he was the leader of the United States. He was the leader of the Continental Army, the Revolutionary War. He was the first president. Because of these reasons, he represents the birth of the United States. Jefferson represents the growth of the United States. Jefferson was the 3rd president of the United States. He saw the nation as it was still continuing to grow and figure out what it wanted to be. He doubled the size of the country by authorizing the Louisiana Purchase. Because of these things that I've mentioned, he is the growth of the United States. Roosevelt is the 3rd president on Mount Rushmore. Roosevelt negotiated the construction of the Panama Canal, which is an artificial waterway in South America. This helps shorten trips that the Americans were taking by almost tenfold. Because of this, Roosevelt represents the development of the U.S. Lincoln is the last president on Mount Rushmore. Lincoln saw the country and led it as it went through some pretty big changes like the Civil War and almost the abolishment of slavery. He gave the Emancipation Proclamation, which was the first step in doing so. Because of these things, Lincoln represents the preservation of the United States.